It has been a minute since I have uploaded on a Saturday, but I just want to take this time to say thank you. Thank you to my YouTube community who has almost helped me reach 20,000 subscribers. And thank you to my newfound love, the Zcam user group, who has really showed up these past few weeks. I can't believe that buying a camera has led to such a positive user group experience. And this group is really a hidden gem on the internet with all the toxicity that exists on this medium, as well as all the toxicity that exists in the camera industry. It just doesn't happen here with Zcam. So this is my way of saying thank you. As you guys have seen by the title, today we are talking about Zlog 2, how to properly expose for it, and how to color grade it. So today I'm going to take you guys in depth on two of the techniques that I teach in my DaVinci Resolve color grading course, and hopefully we can take your color grading to the next level. This video is brought to you by myself. SBG's Elite Colorist is a live interactive color grading course where you and I meet in a virtual classroom twice a week for a whole month. We not only go through an A to Z curriculum in DaVinci Resolve, but you're also able to ask questions, work on examples with me through remote control access, and my personal favorite, share laughs and have a good time with myself and the other students. A link is in the description down below. So the first thing we're going to start with today is we're going to be talking about the proper exposure technique. With respect to Zlog 2, I prefer to use a technique called expose to the right. Basically, my main goal is to protect my highlights. And we're going to start with the same clip that we used in the last tutorial because I feel like this is a prime example of this technique. We can see here looking at our waveform that the only thing we're losing is the sun, but we are pushing our highlights as far as we can north without sacrificing the detail here. The only thing we're really clipping here is the very upper end of the sun. Now, we also want to make sure that we're going to protect our skin tones as well, but generally if your skin tones are falling below 30 IRE, that's where you're really going to want to add in some artificial light. But here, again, we're doing pretty fine with skin tones. Now, this means when you are using a monitor, you're going to want to use the provided Zcam LUT that allows you to correct for 3 stops over exposure and brings you into Rec 709. And then you're going to apply the same technique here, looking at your waveform to make sure that you're not clipping your highlight information. This is going to give us the best noise performance all around. Now, this doesn't apply to every log gamma curve. This specifically applies to log gamma curves that retain a lot of dynamic range in the highlights, which are more highlight friendly. For example, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras, those are going to be more shadow friendly. So you might be pushing your image more towards the left to protect your highlights in a sense. So once we've established that, we're going to just want to make sure that again here, we're protecting those highlights and then we are free to grade. So let's go in and let's create a look in DaVinci Resolve. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to start on this node, and we're going to still use my favorite technique, which is going to be using an HDR node. So I'm going to turn on HDR mode, and this is just going to change the way that my controls react. Now you can choose to use your log wheels, your primary wheels, or your curves. These tools are basically all the same, they're just visualized in a different way. We have our shadows, midtones, and highlights here on our primary wheels. And then we have our shadows, midtones, and highlights just displayed differently on our curves tool. For this example, I'm going to be using the primary wheels. So I'm going to start by taking my shadows and I'm going to set a black point here. And my black point is going to be set right before we get to 0 nits here. Now I'm just going to keep bringing this down. And you can see here, we're starting to crush some of that information. So right about here is where I think I want to leave it. Now notice what this has done too. It's also dragged our highlights down, which is now we're really able to see the information we have here. I'm going to increase my saturation up just a bit. I think I'm going to do 89. Let's do 85. Let's do 85 on the saturation. Now turning off the HDR node, we see what this has done. We've made a correction here on our primary wheels, but without that HDR mode, it really didn't do much. So this is why I like to leave this on. It just makes the tools perform much better in my opinion. The next thing I'm going to do here, because I know that my highlights are pretty much where I want them to be, I'm going to take my gamma or my midtones and I'm going to raise that up just to bring back life in the skin. Right there. Now, here's our before. Here's our after. Now, I think this is a pretty good image to go with. We can start here, but I think I'm going to go ahead into the log wheels and just on the very bottom end, I'm going to bring in a little bit more depth into the shadows. So I'm going to leave the low range where it is. I'm just going to pull that down just a bit right there. Now, if that is too strong for you, you can adjust your low range here and then control exactly where you're putting that shadow information, which is what I mean by these tools are all the same. They're just visualized different and give you different controls. With our regular primary wheels, we're not able to go ahead and set a low and high range. But with our log wheels, we have the same functionality as the primary wheels, but with more control over where we're going to place those adjustments. Where do our shadows lie? Where do our highlights lie? So on and so forth. So again, I'm just going to bump that up just a bit. And right here is where I feel like we're good. This is a good base. This is a good start, right? So the next thing I want to do is correct our skin tones. In this particular example, I do know that there's a lens flare coming off of the lens because the sun is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a node, and let's just see where our skin tones lie. In node 2, we're going to switch from our curves tool over to our qualifier, and I'm going to switch from my waves form to my vector scope. If you guys don't have this little flesh tone line on, go ahead and turn that on right over here because we're going to be using that as an indicator for our skin tones. So from here, I'm going to make sure that the first indicator is selected, and I'm just going to select the midtones of his skin, and let's see what that gives us. All right, so we have this. I'm going to go ahead and manually pull in exactly what I want. If you notice, it pulled in some green because of that lens flare. So I'm just trying to exactly get his skin tones where I want them. So from here, I'm just going to manually back off of the width here, and we're going to leave it as such. Now, I do just want to make sure, let's see, where is that? That's on the very bottom of his chin here. We have some of these reds coming in, so I'm going to make sure that I just include that just a little bit right there. And then to clean this up and tighten it up a bit, I'm going to add in some low soft. See, what is that doing on the side of his face here? So that's a highlight. That's why that's happening. I'm going to add in some low soft, and we're going to denoise it just a bit. Now, I do see this little piece over here that's outside of our qualification, so I'm just going to make sure I put a little box over that to make sure we get rid of that so that it's not affected. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click this inverse button. And right here is a good skin tone qualification. So from here, looking just at the information here, I definitely see it shifted more towards the green side. Remember, our color wheel here is going to be transposed on top of our vector scope here. So looking at this, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull his skin tones back to its neutral standing because I feel that's more lifelike for my grandfather's skin tones here. So I'm going to turn off this highlight here. And in order to pull him back to neutral, I'm going to add the opposite color, which is going to be magenta. And I actually think maybe I'll add in a little bit more red because he does have a red undertone. And I feel like that has pulled back his skin tones from the green to more so where my grandfather lies. And I'm going to adjust this ever so slightly just until it's neutral. Right about there is what I feel more represents my grandfather's tone. He does have a little bit of redness to his skin. You know, brown comes in all different flavors, all types of beautiful flavors. So I think that's where we're going to leave this for now. Next, we're going to create a look. Now, when we're talking about creating looks, we need to ask ourselves, what was our main goal in pre-production, right? A lot of us out here are run and gun shooters. And one of the things I teach in my course is oftentimes that pre-production is where our color grading starts, where we're going to be doing our set design. We're going to be choosing color palettes that fit different color schemes that allow us to convey the right emotion based off the colors we're choosing. Now, in this instance, this was just a test shot that I used on my camera. And so I really didn't think about any of the colors going on. So what can we do? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at a color theory chart that I like to use with my students that helps us really at least pick something out from what we have. So in our documents here, we have our color wheel. So it shows us where our primary colors are, our secondary colors, and our tertiary colors. It also shows us which colors are warm and which colors are cool. Now, if we zoom in here, one of the things that I noticed is that we did have something close to a split complementary color grade going on, and that is the ability to use blue, green, red, and orange. If you notice, my grandfather's shirt was red, his jacket wasn't blue-green, but it was blue, and we have a sky that we can push orange into. So I'm going to take this split complementary color scheme to create my look. This is just because that's the colorist I am. I at least want to create something that's actually going to be pleasing to the eye. So from here, we've added our node going into node 3, and we're going to left click on that and add a layer. And we're going to connect the alpha output information to that layer here on the bottom. The reason why we connect it to the bottom is because the bottom goes on top. So this means anything we do now isn't going to affect our skin tones like that. Our skin tones pretty much stay the same, which is the goal. We're not doing anything crazy like that, but we're going to go in now and we're going to do some color correcting to get our look the way we want it. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and let's double check here with our curves tool, and we're going to use a hue versus hue curve. And I'm going to select his jacket. Now from here, I'm going to pull it to that more blue-green look that we had going on in that split complementary look. Before, after. It's just that tiny adjustment here that I was really going for. And all I did here was I clicked this little icon here, and that allowed me to select. Once I brought it on here, it allowed me to qualify that look. I'm going to go ahead and take the entire blue range now and push it to that more warmer color. Now the next thing we have going on in this color grade that we can push a little bit more towards a sharper color is going to be this red here. Now I don't have to go in and correct the red. I think it's pretty much there, but I think I just want to make sure that we're actually at that nice violent pop of red that had. And I think that right there, again, just those tiny changes before and after are really good with what we're going for with our color grade. Now, we also have these green trees here. We can push these because they're on, when we look at our color wheel, let's look at this, it's on that warmer side. Greens are right in the cross section between cool. Now trying to push an orange to a blue, that's going to be hard, but trying to push a green to an orange is going to be possible according to our color theory chart. So going back here, we are going to, let's actually just select green here. And see what we're getting here. So you see that? It's not the sharpest turn, but we're just trying to push it just enough that it falls more in that color palette. Even the shadows here. It's not going to be the most vibrant thing. It's not going to be the most aggressive change, but we want to get it more towards that warmer end of green. I'm not trying to get reds in there. Just that warmer end of green. Maybe just a little bit of red in the shadows. I kind of like that because we do have that there. So boom, look what we got here. Just these tiny changes before and after. Now you might be asking me, well, what else can we do here? We're going to go ahead and use our log wheels now, and we're going to add in some warmth to the sky. So now that we've adjusted the clothing and the variables that we can, let's go ahead and now push that last component, that orange, into our highlights. So I'm going to throw in a color into the highlights, and then I'm going to move my high range down until it starts affecting the areas that I want. And this right here is what I'm going to want it to affect. So now I have a bright color here. I see it's on the side of his skin, so it's going to look like it's part of it. And that's what we want to make sure, that the highlights fit and appeal as part of the skin. And I think right about there is where I want to leave this. Now look at our vector scope. We have the split complementary look going on here. We have two colors that are split, and then we have the complement right there. So we've accomplished this look. We're just going to go back here on the skin tones now. And actually, I think that was not, I don't think the skin tones are actually the problem. I think I just had it highlighted, and so it looked like his skin tones were an issue. So I misspoke. The skin tones are fine, and that is how I would go about color grading this scene. I could go back in and add in a little bit more saturation to the very end, just to really make it pop. The last thing that we're going to want to do with this click is we're going to want to check our CIE chromaticacy, because guess what? We are definitely outside of the legal limits of Rec 709. Now, this isn't so much of an issue unless you have tight broadcast standards, but just for professionalism, we're going to go ahead and fix this. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Open Effects tab. We're going to use a color space transform on this last node. Then we're going to click gamut mapping method to saturation mapping. It did shift our red just a little bit, but we can take the saturation max and we can push it just a little bit until we get back to where we want it to be. And that is how we stay in those legal limits and get this awesome color grade. Now let's go ahead and move on to clip 2 and talk about our second method. Now we're going to be using the same HDR method here to start our initial grade, but then we're going to be creating a look with a different method. So I'm going to click HDR mode here, and again, make sure we're in our primary wheels. And I'm just going to go ahead and start by doing what we normally do. We're going to bring down our shadows to a nice good point. I think right about here is good for what we're going to start with. Then I'm going to increase the saturation, and I think I want to push up my highlights just a little bit and maybe bring down the midtones just a smidge. Just a smidge. So I think this is a pretty good start, a pretty good canvas for what we're going to be doing next. I've set the black points about where I want them, but we're going to go ahead and fine tune it with a technique I like to call relighting. So we're going to add a serial node and we're going to add a layer node. And from here, we are going to change our bottom layer to monochrome over here in our RGB mixer. And then we're going to change our method, our composite mode on our layer mixer to overlay. Now you see this did something a little bit crazy. It added in a ton of contrast. We're going to go through now and we're going to rework this. So if you don't know what each one is going to do here, oops, wrong node. So on our node 4 right here, this black and white one, if you don't know what each one's going to do here, go ahead and play around with it. But I'm going to start by pushing up my red limit, my red output just a little bit. I'm going to bring down my blue output just a bit because it's going to add more of that dynamic contrast that I'm looking for. And then we can play around with the green output, see what it does. And I know I want to push this up a little bit too. Now we can see here that this definitely went ham on the skin tones. So on this top node up here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce some of the mid-tone detail just a bit so it's not going so hard on the skin tones. And then I'm going to add in saturation just to bring us back to where we should be. Now don't worry, I know the skin tones look a little bit funky, but we're going to figure this out in a second. But first, let's continue with our relighting. So this started as a very high key scene, as we see according to the log image. And then when we go into our original HDR grade, this is what we get. And now after a little bit of relighting, we are here. Let's go ahead and add another node. And we're actually going to move this node back because we're going to be doing some work in between here. But the first thing I want to do is I want to really sell this shadow a little bit more. I want it to be a little bit more edgy. So we're going to use a power window. And we're going to use the gradient tool down here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to switch the direction that it's going. It's right about over here. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to bring down the offset to make it a little bit darker. Let's start about right here. Now you can see we can pull this in. I want this right about here. Now you might be saying, oh, well now this looks fake. Like this just looks like we threw on a little bit of a gradient, which is what we did. So now let's go ahead and add a luminance qualifier. So we're going to go into our qualifier tab, adding in the luminance qualifier, and I'm going to pick the luminance value of this window. Now do you see what this did? Look what it did for us here. Let's turn that off. It's added in some dynamics to the highlights and the folds right here of the robe. And that is why this is one of my favorite methods. I'm just going to add in a little bit of denoise, and I'm going to go ahead while we're in this luminance qualifier, just adding in other values too to make sure we're good. Oh, let me undo that because I might have did a little bit too much. qualify this out too. Really adding in the dynamics right here of what we have. So before, after. So now we have more of that dynamic contrast. From here, we're gonna go back, we're gonna click on our layer mixer, and I wanna add another serial node. Let's take care of our skin tones now, or at least qualify them out. So I'm gonna go in here, and I'm gonna click on just a regular piece of our skin, and let's highlight it. This is what we have so far. I'm going to add just a few more pieces in here with the additional portion of the selection range, and then I'm gonna come into my feather tool and feather in the rest of the skin tones right here. And then we're gonna go into our low range, make sure that we go back to an HSL qualifier, and we're gonna just boost our low range up just a bit to cut out any of the excess that we don't need. Now for right now, I think I'm gonna just boost in a little bit of a yellow-orange color. And you'll see why this looks strong, but as we go in, because this qualification isn't so tight, everything's gonna work out and you'll see what I mean. So I'm just gonna add in just this warm tone here. And then we're gonna add in a final look. So we're gonna go add serial, add node, add layer, and then do another layer mixer here with an alpha output. Now for this one, I'm really inspired by the green that we have here. And because my walls are neutral and we have a lot of neutral colors here, we can really push that in as far as this goes. Now you might be asking, why is this window dark? There is a deck there. It's actually supposed to be darker than this window. So don't worry about that. But we're gonna go into our primary wheels now, go into log. And using the knowledge of color theory that I have, I'm gonna push in red to the shadows, because when I mix that with green, it's going to create a nice brown, which is really going to complement this green color that we have going on here. And in the midtones, I'm just going to push in a green color and adjust the low range until I get it about where I want. Now I think I'm going to move this green color more towards just the warmer side, just a little bit. I might draw off just a bit right about here. And then I think even with my skin tones, I'm going to draw off on this just a bit. And then looking at the highlights, we have this white. We're going back into our look node now. Look at the white on my robe. That's not gonna fly here. That doesn't look like it's part of this green color. But I do want to add in a color to the highlights, and I think a nice warm color would be appropriate. I think by throwing that in here, that really complements the scene. We can bring the low range down to just mix that in a little bit better. Right over here. So now those highlights look like they're part of the scene, and it's not so even. So this light that's coming in here is reflected in the highlights of the jacket so far, which is what I'm liking. Now let's do the same thing to our skin tones. Let's find our skin tones. Let's find its high range. Right about there. Now let's bring in some of those same warm colors into the skin tones too, so they fit the scene. And we can even, if we feel like that's just a little bit too bright, we can bring down the intensity right here with the offset to make the skin tones fit a little bit more. So we have our HDR grade, which we started with here. We completely relit the scene to this. So all in all, I think this is a great look. There's a few things that I would tweak about it, but this is a YouTube tutorial. I do not have time to take you guys A through Z like I would in a course, but I do hope that this teaches you some cool methods that you can use when color grading in DaVinci Resolve. I specifically love the Creating Looks class in my DaVinci Resolve color grading course because it comes right after the Foundations of Color Theory class. And just to see my students bring it all together is so cool. It's so exciting to hear the excitement in their voice when they start to see all the pieces click. So if you guys would like to get in on this live color grading course, a link is in the description down below. Sign up because registration for this coming up month will be ending soon. If you guys like this video, be sure to give me a big thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications if you have not. Be sure to follow me on my social media. A link is in the description down below, as well as the YouTube fam. Their links are also in the description down below. If you guys are ever feeling uninspired, uncreative, or just want to give up on life, remember, every day airplanes take off against the wind. Keep climbing, stay inspired, And as always, stay fabulous. My name is Sydney, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out.